Hello and welcome to the Essential Dynamics podcast. Today's podcast starts with a somber tone. On November 28th, 2024, my daughter Jade's husband, Jared Bateman, passed away peacefully at the age of 37 after a long battle with debilitating chronic pain and associated health issues. Today, I'm joined with my daughter, Lisha, to help me dedicate this episode to Jared and the completion of his mortal quest. Lisha, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Dad.
I know that our thoughts are both tender at this time, but it just seems to be appropriate to share a little bit about what we learned from Jared. Jared created a website to share a bit of his story, and in it he included some of those most tender thoughts. And thought maybe just for this time we could each pick one, talk about it for a minute. Have you got something?
I do. So one of the things that about Jared's experience that I think is an important thing for me to learn from and to carry with me is how well he masked his pain. So Jared was experiencing basically constant debilitating pain. And he says that some people think that I'm giving up, and if they were me, they would continue pushing themselves through life. Those people simply haven't fallen into my pit. They have no idea how dark, unbearable, and pervasive it is. And I think it's a really important reminder to all of us that we have no idea what the people around us are experiencing every day, what they're carrying every day. Every interaction we have might be with someone who's having their hardest week. And so I think it's an important thing for us to carry through, to really have that sort of like empathy and grace and forgiveness of people around us, and just assume that we don't always know what someone's experiencing, even when we might think that we know them well.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And those comments from Jared, and actually the whole experience as we started to understand how much he was suffering, reminds me of the words of a hymn that say, "Who am I to judge another when I walk imperfectly? In the quiet heart is hidden sorrow that the eye can't see." And on one hand, Jared's strength in coping with it was admirable, but sometimes we missed that the pain that he was going through in him, and we do miss it in other people. This comment also reminds me of we talk about the epic quest, and so we use the Lord of the Rings a lot, and I ran across this letter that J.R. Tolkien wrote to someone who asked him if maybe Frodo had failed because he wasn't the one that ultimately cast the ring into the fire. And Tolkien said that we can't judge where someone else's limits are. He said judgment upon any such case should depend on the motives and disposition with which Frodo started out, and should weigh his actions against the utmost possibility of his powers all along the road to whatever proved the breaking point. He said Frodo's real contract was only to do what he could, to try to find a way, and to go on as far as on the road as his strength of mind and body allowed. He did that. I do not myself see that the breaking of his mind and will under demonic pressure after torment was any more a moral failure than the breaking of his body would have been. One of the things that we've studied in Essential Dynamics is this idea of an outward mindset, and it comes from the work of Terry Warner. And he tries to help us understand how important it is to see other people as people and try and understand their motivations and what they're going through. And I think I used the word grace, and as we give other people grace, I find it hard because there's way more things to worry about in life if I think that other people have problems. But to treat the people as people, that's what you have to do. And the price of love and of fellowship is seeing and feeling the pain of other people. So thanks for sharing that. My quotation from Jared, which I was a little bit surprised to find. I don't know, I shouldn't have been surprised, but it's just so much wisdom in just so few words. If you want to live with no regrets, it's really quite simple. All you need to do is make the best decisions you can with the information you have. That way, you may wish for a different outcome, but you can always be satisfied with your process and effort. What do you think of that?
I think that resonates with me on a few different levels. I mean, as a mom, like I rarely have it in me to do all of the things that I think I should be doing to be successful. And a lot of the time, it's just doing the best that I can that day with what I have in the tank and with the information that I have. It's true a lot for me in a work context as well. So I'm a management consultant. The apple did not fall far from the tree. And
So proud of you, Lisha.
and often we set out on a project with, okay, this is all the information that we're going to collect to be able to help us come to some sort of conclusion or recommendation. And very rarely along the way do we find all of the information that we're looking for. And generally speaking, we have to just say, okay, this is the best information that we have. And these are the best decisions that we can make with the information we have, and be content with being able to move forward in some way, in the best way that we can on that day with that information. And if we didn't do that, then things would never move forward.
We'd never move forward. That's right. And then the other aspect of this resonates with me is this idea that you can feel good about the work that you do, even when you don't get the outcome that you want. And that certainly was the case Jared faced many times as he tried to get resolution of his health challenges. But ultimately, I think he felt that he fought the good fight. And that's all any of us could do. And as I work with clients, we actually focus on the process because it's the one thing you can't control. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that Jared left us with his observations on that wisdom. So, Lisha, thank you so much for helping us make this episode meaningful, a meaningful remembrance of Jared. We'd like to thank all those who've supported and continue to support Jade and Jared, and continue to support Jade and their families and their friends at this challenging time. And Lisha, thanks for all that you've done in our family to help Jade and to help Jared and Jade. We appreciate the time that people are taking to listen to this. We share Essential Dynamics because we believe it gives us insight into foundational truths that can make our lives and the lives of those around us better. And we feel that sharing some of Jared's thoughts today contributes to that and honors Jared's legacy, which we appreciate so much. So thank you, Lisha.
Thank you, Dad.
Welcome to Essential Dynamics. I'm Derek Hudson, and this is the Essential Dynamics podcast. I'm joined today with my colleague from Unconstrained, Dave Kane, and we're here to record the final episode of season 4 and the final episode of the calendar year 2024. Dave, welcome
Hello.
back.
Hey, thanks for having me back again. Yeah, 25-ish episodes and another year gone by. So that goes by really quickly.
They do. And so now we've come up with this sort of impossible task of trying to pull some of the thoughts that we've had over the last several episodes together and in a bit of a summary as we close out the year, give people something more resonant to think about maybe.
I think it's the time of year when, people stop and reflect about the past year and sort of, pause and look at things. So let's take a look at what we did over the year and then figure out how do we leverage that at this time and just sort of think about things. So I think over the year, when I look back, obviously we talked a lot about, our systems and systems flow. But I think if I had to sort of bucket it, I think we probably talked about systems thinking and sort of identifying and resolving the root issues. Then we had a lot of themes about overcoming stagnation and sort of that purposeful action. And then there's a third bit about leadership and sort of the focus on aligning resources and meaningful outcomes. So maybe if we take those 3 buckets, let's just sort of pick and choose from some of our episodes and see what we think. So when I start with systems, thinking, and flow, anything jump to mind from the last 25 episodes? Is it the key things that stuck with you?
Well, one thing that really sticks with me is that when things go wrong, it's usually because we're experiencing systems dysfunction. And that's not supposed to be the way it is. Systems are designed to flow, but when human design systems don't tend to flow very well sometimes. And so that's why, we need to learn how to think from a systems framework. And our inclination is, I don't know what it is, in our sort of limited, finite brain capacity, we want to carve things up into little pieces and then solve little pieces. And the problem with the system is you can't do that.
Yeah, it's something weird in our nature that we tend to break things into silos when we get complicated problems. And then you go look at anything in nature, and it's a system. Everything works together, and truly good functioning organizations operate as a system. And yet that's not where our natural mind goes to. It's break it into a small piece and chew on each one.
Yeah, one of the things that we highlighted in one of the episodes, and they all blur together for me, is this concept that our education systems don't teach system thinking. And for whatever reason, our board governance, executive leadership traditions don't tend to think of integrated systems as much as individual subject areas.
Yeah, agreed. And there are very few courses along the way, and the more memorable ones were certainly the ones that sort of tried to bring everything together. But it'd be nice to have a bit more of that. So for me, I think it was a quote that you threw out very early on one of the episodes I was listening to, and it was, if you have a systems problem, you need a systems solution. And that's the one that kind of resonated with me from the year.
Yeah. Yeah. There's really no other way, but if you don't recognize something as a system problem, then you don't have open to you the idea that you would use a system approach to come up with a solution. And I'll just give a general example. I can think of some specifics. So you think that there's something wrong in your organization because you're not getting the output that you want. Something is not flowing. And so you try to use the angle of accountability and figure out who's screwing up, and then either fix them or get them out of the system. Mm-hmm. And it's very rare that one person is causing your problem. It's also quite highly likely that one person's behavior is in response to the system, the part of the system with which they interact. And so if you swap the person out, you'll put a new person in the same system, get the same problem. Actually, it comes to mind now, I have a very specific example of that from my Price Waterhouse days, where I was engaged to research, do, I guess, forensic accounting work to find out how much money the controller stole from the company. The insurance company needed to know or they needed to report to the insurance company so the insurance company could pay them, because the controller was writing checks to himself and hiding the entries in the books. And so I did that and figured out the 4 or 5 different ways that we detected where the money was being fraudulently taken. And the company got their money back, and the person actually, I think, went to jail. And then about 2 years later, someone from my firm came up to me and said, "Hey, did you do a fraud investigation for this company once?" And I said, "Yes, indeed, I did." And I said, "What's up?" They said, "Well, we have another one."
The same company.
Same company.
Oh, you're kidding.
Same position. So they didn't change the system at all. They thought, they fired the dishonest controller and hired a new one. And the new one knew that they'd replaced a dishonest controller. And rather than being encouraged to and being supported in changing the control systems, eventually the new controller succumbed to the temptation and started stealing money from the company.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's an extreme example.
That is extreme.
But,
yes.
Let's fix the system. We can, there's a reason people act the way they do, and usually it's because it's in the context of something bigger. We were talking this morning in our team about the tendency of organizations kind of on the other side is to try and hire sort of the unicorn person that's going to, drop in the executive position that is responsible for all the problems in the company. And
Yeah.
and we'll just, if we hire this person who's really good with customers, really good on production, financial acumen, great to work with, good with people, good motivator, communicates well, we're just going to hire that person and fix the organization. And typically what happens is that they can't survive in that organization.
Or they get pulled into the quagmire with everything else and they can't step back because they're too busy fighting all the fires that they got brought in to deal with.
Right. So they use their skills for the wrong purpose because they end up having to pick a side or something. So if you have a system problem, you need a system solution. So first, see it as a system problem, and then second, look to a system solution. Now, I guess maybe Essential Dynamics and this podcast has kind of two things to offer in that regard. One is you have to think of it as a system, and two is here's a way to think about a system. And Essential Dynamics is pretty simple, and it's pretty accessible, and it's not everything you need to understand complex systems. But I think our point is you got to get started understanding a complex system. So let's give you a simple tool with which to start.
Oh, that makes good sense. Okay, so then let's move along to the next theme that we hit on in a bunch of episodes that I was on, and I know you tackled it elsewhere, and that was that overcoming organizational stagnation, or as I think we always call it, you're stuck.
Yeah, getting stuck.
Or getting unstuck.
Or well, you get stuck and then you get unstuck. And like part of that is this idea that anything you can handle that's slowing production, disrupting your progress, disrupting your flow, you handle, you solve management solves the problem. And you get increasingly large and complex organization as you're on a growth path, and you solve problems until you bump into one that you can't solve, or you bump into one that requires too much focus and energy that you don't have, or skills or competence that you don't have. And so then you get stuck. The other way that you could get stuck is that you could lose sight of the goal, or lose that energy flow that we've talked about. And so you're stuck, not because there's some outside force acting on you, but you've lost the motivation. And you think about that, the word motivation, you've lost the driving force. And so you are stuck. So maybe, production's going out the door, but the organization isn't growing. People aren't being fulfilled. New customers aren't being helped. And so you're stuck, you're stagnant. I mean, stagnation, we haven't used that word much, but it's a good one because what's stagnant? Water that doesn't move is stagnant. And what's the opposite of that? Slow.
It's slow. No, I think that makes sense because we spend a lot of episodes talking about comfortably stuck and getting off the couch. And as you sort of say it, I think you're bang on with it's because that energy flow changes, right? And you don't have that same energy and drive, and you're comfortable. And you've said it a number of times before. It's like, change is hard, and getting unstuck in some cases is just what others didn't really want to take on. So,
Dave, I agree with all of that, but I have been in conversations with people where they tell me two things. They tell me how hard their life is, and they tell me how hard the anticipated change is. And I'm like, well, one of those two hard things is productive and the other isn't. And so maybe choose the hard thing that produces some value rather than the hard thing that's the cycle of inertia.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And if we could just get you up to that macro level running the economy, then I think we'd be in good shape because a lot of that you see systemically across our productivity problems. And I think we talked about that one this year too, of um, just in general, I think that is sort of Canada at the moment, where we have this productivity problem and we're not growing at the same rate as everybody else. And I think there's a little bit of that comfort in there.
Yeah, so we talked about it. We talked about leveraging discomfort, really digging in and feeling the pain and understanding it to the point where you're not going to take it anymore. I think the other thing is that there's the potential for more ambition. And we talk about drivers and constraints, and I think ultimately drivers trump constraints. If your driver's strong enough, you just kind of blow through the constraint. And part of that is, maybe you get to a different level of system thinking, not thinking, but just motivation, and you just blow through. So here we are in this country where, I don't know, 25% of the world, half the world would move here tomorrow if they had the chance. And we have clean air, clean water, natural resources, space, very warm and open culture, but poor economic performance, poor prospects for a lot of things because it's good enough. Well, it's not good enough for the immigrants who come in and don't get work. It's not good enough for the homeless people we're leaving behind. It's not good enough for the rest of the world who could be consuming our clean energy instead of burning forests down and burning coal and stuff like that. We've got the opportunity to introduce technology that we've developed in Canada throughout the world, and we don't seem to have the drive and the ambition to do that all the time. And maybe that's a puzzle for season 5. But
yeah, no, I think it is. Can I circle back, take a little tangent here? You said that if your drivers are strong enough, they'll probably blow through the constraints.
Yeah.
Do you think the drivers are harder to build and get strength behind than it is to go and remove constraints? Like, are we not spending enough attention on drivers because we always go for the constraint?
I think I think that unconstrained doesn't spend enough attention on drivers. There's an entire consulting industry and academic line of thinking around the theory of constraints, which starts with the assumption that we have flow and it's being blocked by a constraint. And there's a lot of good stuff there, but I have to ask, where's the corresponding theory of drivers? Because when you get your why and when you are bent on a purpose, then things that seemed insurmountable can be quickly dispatched. And there's, I think of so many examples just in people's lives, and they're, probably too personal to share examples where someone is stuck like with an addiction or, lack of motivation, and then they find their purpose, and then they just become the person that they, kind of were meant to be, and they blow through stuff that used to be seen as such big limits in their life. And I think it's the same for organizations. If you think about really cool stories of exploration, and you think about scientific achievement under stress, it's about the driver. The constraint's been there for, for hundreds of years, and then all of a sudden the ingenuity comes at the right moment to crack through. So I think there's lots to the question of how do we bring drivers into our lives, into our organizations. And I mean, and our position, our hypothesis is that it's largely aligning with a purpose that's valuable enough to generate that kind of energy.
Yeah. And then when we talked about entrepreneurs and all those pieces earlier as well. It's their drive, their energy, sole proprietorships. It's all on the shoulders of the one who started it a lot of times, and they try to, you know, how do I have a system when it all flows through me? But I think that all kind of circles back to number 3, which is we talked a lot about sort of leadership and resource optimization, which, I think you coined the management attention deficit along the way here this year, right? So
management attention deficit. That's a powerful concept. So at some point in an organization, there's the focus and the mental energy on whatever needs to be done to improve the organization, and that can't be widely distributed in the organization. So it sits on one person or maybe a couple of people. And the problem is that the ways that can get spent are unlimited. The supply of it is limited. And so you can easily run a deficit. And if that's the case, and you can't really make more management focus and attention, then you have to optimize its use. You have to deploy it for on the right things, the leverage point or the most critical problem. And that's not easy to do. But there's a lot to that. And that might be the leadership problem of our modern day. Since email started, that might be the key leadership problem is management attention deficit.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd agree with that. And then, so there's management attention, focusing on the right thing. We talk a lot about that, toward stepping back, looking at your company, the system, figure out where to put your attention. But we also took the leadership side of looking at, well, how to be a good leader. And I think I remember something about leadership wasn't about the incentives. It was more about how you get people to see how they create value. And it was bringing in of the purpose, path, and people. It was integrating the people in with the other 2 pieces.
Yeah. So there's a book that we've referred to a few times, Drive by Daniel Pink. There should be more material out there, but I've spent way too much time as a CFO designing incentive pay systems or monitoring them or executing on incentive pay systems with the assumption that if I can put more money in somebody's pocket based on some program, that they'll give me more.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think it's true. I believe in sharing value with employees. Don't get me wrong. But I was in a situation once where I was sort of arguing with board members that our people already are committed to this organization and they're professionals and they're giving you their all, and to say that they're holding back for some additional percentage that they're holding back, and we're going to pry that out of them with some kind of pay plan. I found it. I think I told him it was insulting. I thought it. I don't know if I told him.
But that's then where, as you formulated this out, when you're looking at the people, it's what do the people need from the organization and what does the organization need of the people? And when they're committed and already giving, then what you need to provide them is something different than a financial incentive.
They need a sense of purpose. They need a sense of autonomy. They need the ability to be creative and to see the value of their work flow through to the value of the organization.
Yeah.
And they want to be respected for their efforts and compensated. But the intrinsic motivation is way more powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so those were the 3 kind of buckets I thought about when I was kind of reflecting on, okay, that year went by quickly. The one piece that I find I'm using most often is still go build the birdhouse, building the birdhouse piece. What's the key piece in there for you?
So I think there's 2 things. I think you picked up one stronger than I do, which is let's just have a bias for action rather than analysis. But the other thing for me is that you got to be working on stuff that creates value. And so what I see with a lot of management techniques, all the latest books and stuff like that is that might be your critical constraint right now, in which case you should devour that stuff and go fix your business. But if you don't know what your critical constraint is, don't just pick the flavor of the month and implement that as a management system. You have to figure out how you create value and then create more value. And so the birdhouse metaphor is in the story, if you want birds to nest in your yard, you have to build a birdhouse. No design, no looking at plans, no research, no hoping, no painting pictures of birds gives you birds, but you got to build a birdhouse. And so, yes, action, and yes, action that's focused on the thing that's going to make the most difference in creating value. So all of the stuff that we talk about through 100 plus episodes in Essential Dynamics is all good stuff. But for any person or organization that's trying to make a major change, there's one thing that's getting in the way right now, and you got to figure out what that is. And that's your birdhouse.
Go build what truly matters.
Yeah.
So with me, there's that element of stop overthinking it. Don't just move it forward, stop endlessly planning, and then just that whole purposeful action side of it stood out to me. But you're right. So as we kind of bring the year to a close, what do you do at year end when you're kind of stepping back, reflecting on these kind of things using your framework?
So one thing I like to do, and I like to do it particularly when I'm a little bit overloaded and stressed, is make a practice of identifying things that have gone well, things that are really cool that they happened, and focusing on that at least as much as the to-do list. Because it's pretty easy I can think of so many good ideas. I can think of more good ideas in an hour than I can do in a year. And that's on top of the ideas that other people have for me of things I can do. And so that gets overwhelming, but just to say, well, that happened, that was cool. When our kids were at home, my child did that showed growth and maturity. I'm grateful for that and surprised. But the client is starting to really come into their own, and I'm glad for that. And we landed this big contract, and glad for that. And I personally am reacting better in stressful situations. I'm glad for that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is after you do that, forget the to-do list for a minute and just kind of dream. Like what is system flow? Where could that take you? If there wasn't sort of so much friction in what you're trying to accomplish, and you were lined up with value where your customers were, the people you're working with were, like, where could that take you? And then you wouldn't want that to be, well, we've arrived and we're complacent. It's like, if we can do this, what else can we take on? What other value can we bring to the world? That's where I would go.
That's so positive and optimistic. So I do the same. You always sort of reflect on the positive pieces of the year, and then as I start to transition into, okay, well, what's next year? Somebody really smart along the way sort of said, and that key question of, well, why do you put up with that? And I kind of take that approach of, you look at these things along the way, and in the cases of what we were looking at, are you stuck? Could the organization do more? Or even just, in my career or just other initiatives. And it's sort of like, well, why does it have to be that way? Why do I have to put up with that? And I don't. And then you get into the mindset of, okay, how do I change that? And how do I bring about, and maybe it's removing the constraint mindset, but it's just that one question of, well, why do you put up with that?
Yeah. So
you don't need to.
Those are the two questions. There's the driver's question, which is like, what could we do if we had flow? And there's the constraint question, which is, why do we put up with this right now?
Yeah.
Those are both questions. So Dave, maybe I'll take it back at this point, or did you have anything else?
No, I'm just trying to figure out why it is everything it comes to my mind ends up back in the Essential Dynamics framework here. So
So we plan it that way.
Everything fits back into it. So
We plan it that way. So here we are wrapping up 2024. Like to thank Dave for all your work in these last few episodes. As we've made you step up a bit. Bryn Griffiths, thanks very much, and all our guests that we had this year. We're coming in on Christmas time, and so I encourage people to look at the Christmas special, which is a connection of essential dynamics to the Christmas story. We won't go over that, and maybe with this one, we'll acknowledge that in the original version of this episode, we acknowledged and dedicated this episode to the memory of my son-in-law, Jared Bateman, and top of this episode, we discussed some of his advice, which is consistent with things we're trying to understand. And so we're on a quest, but we don't have to travel alone. And I'm really grateful for fellow travelers and would encourage everyone to appreciate the people that they work with and they live with and that they love at this time of the year. And say to everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and consider your quest.